Welcome everybody to our session today titled Information Architecture, the New Paradigm. Should a person find the data or should the data find the person? Really excited to talk to you about this topic today. Is everyone in the right room? We have a hall pass up here if anybody needs to go to the restroom. Otherwise, have a seat and we'll go ahead and get started. So, brief introductions. My name is Jesus Salazar. I'm a principal with Credera. With me presenting, I have Mike Moore, a senior manager with Credera. Both Mike and I have been working with Microsoft technologies for a while and have had a strong focus in SharePoint, and definitely are excited to be up here with you. So, what an exciting time to be involved in SharePoint. You know, every year we try to choose a topic here at TechFest that is very relevant, that there's some exciting things going on, and some things that companies need to be mindful of if they want to be forward-thinking and get the most ROI out of SharePoint as possible. 2 years ago, we talked about information architecture, and we decided to revisit it again because of all the things that are changing and just the dynamics in the world and some of the pressures and the stresses that a common organization needs to work with. So let's talk quickly about some of those. First off, can any of you relate to this picture here? Maybe some of your employees can. I know we can from time to time. Well, there's a reason for that. The reason is the average person receives more than 63,000 words of new information every day. If you think about it, that's about as much as your average novel every single day. So, you know, information is fast flowing and it's getting harder and harder to manage. In addition to this new, this information overload, we have a changing workforce. They're called the millennials. In fact, studies show that by 2020, 40% of the workforce will be millennials. So let's talk about what the impact of this changing workforce is. Well, to understand the millennials, there's a couple of things you should keep in mind. First off, this is a group that is part cyborg. You know, they come with multiple devices included, attached to them, and you'll pry those out of their cold dead hands. Bring your own device is something that companies need to deal with day in and day out. This is also a group, and this is key for information architecture. This is also a group that was born with Wikipedia and Google at their fingertips, and so this is a group that's been able to historically get complex answers to very complex questions just by moving their thumbs. You know, so think about that. The other dynamic here, titled "Let's Talk More" tweet, speaks to the way that they tend to interact and collaborate with one another. This is a group that values virtual interactions, and they get more out of these virtual interactions than traditional phone conversations or face-to-face conversations. You know, this has a lot of stresses on the workplace, you know, and also tends to blur the lines between 8 to 5, Monday to Friday, workday where you're scheduling meetings and meeting face-to-face. And then in addition to that, a group that really focuses on social media is something that's ingrained in their DNA. You know, I found a funny stat that seems to encapsulate all of this. You know, and the title of this slide is "Millennials are sure to take us to places we never dared to go before." One of those places appears to be the bathroom. So millennials are twice as likely to use social media in the bathroom. So, you know, this is funny, this stat. With my nephew, you know, his Facebook updates made a lot more sense to me after I found this item here. So, in addition to this new workforce, there's also a lot of opportunity. You know, there's a great study done by Gartner about information management in the 21st century, which said the existing tools and techniques just can't keep up to the rate that this information is evolving. And modifying existing assets and having an old centric mind of thinking is not sufficient to meet our challenge today. Furthermore, they predict by as soon as next year, companies that are able to figure this out and figure out a coherent information management infrastructure and strategy will outperform their industry peers by more than 20%. That's got to be pretty exciting for everybody. In addition to that, there's this whole emergence of Enterprise 3.0. How many of you have heard of 3.0? So this is obviously the next incarnation of Web 2.0. You know, just taking a quick blast from the past, Enterprise 1.0 was all about getting information out on the internet and making it easy for things to find. Enterprise 2.0 was where we started allowing people to be part of this, part of the equation, and contribute to information. Now where we're sitting is in a spot where all of this collaboration and bringing people in and letting them comment and collaborate has created so much information, we just can't manage it all. It's giving people headaches. The new paradigm is just tell me what I need to know. So let's all think about that for a little bit. We're not saying, let me tell you what I need to know or what I'm looking for and bring it to me. It's just tell me what I need to know. This is a fundamental shift in the way we've been thinking, and you'll see we have some practical approaches on how to bridge this gap. So before we do that, though, let's talk about the evolution of information architecture. Those of you that attended our talks a couple years ago will remember this diagram. This is the definition of IA. So by sorting out things like classification, hierarchy, metadata tagging, navigation, wayfinding, and search, information architecture will connect people to the content that they're looking for. However, if you look, we need to tweak this definition just a little bit because things have changed slightly. So we're all used to working on this left-hand side of the equation called institutional controlled data. This is analogous to your corporate intranets, your newsletters, your user manuals, all of these things where you're taking a small group is working on a deliverable that has a lot of value for an entire organization or usually a broader group of people. They finish it, they mediate it, and then they publish it for everyone to access. Well, now we have to deal with this whole other side of the equation, which is consumer-controlled information. This could be information where you're providing feedback and thoughts and comments on institutionally controlled data, or you may be collaborating on something that hasn't even been thought of before, is more ad hoc, maybe a project or a new idea. However, the result of this is on the right-hand side is that information comes in much smaller pieces. It has a much shorter shelf life, and there's way more of it. That makes us have to think about a new way of information architecture. So we need to shift our definition a little bit. And it goes like this. By understanding a user's intent, that's what they're intending to accomplish and based off their role and their job and their history, and then their context. That's the circumstances in which they're accessing a piece of information. You know, it could be they're working on a specific project or they're trying to accomplish a specific task. And then applying that to our normal definition of information architecture, then we're going to allow people to connect people to other people and to the content that they're looking for. So if you think about this, this is all about taking a user, putting them first, and not just a user role or a user type, but the instance in which that user is accessing your portal, and then tailoring your classification, your meta tagging, your navigation, and how search results pull up to do this. So you're really putting the user first in a way that's never been thought of before. So that's the new definition, and this is the world we are going to continue living in and will become more and more apparent and more important over time. So let's talk about some practical ways to do this, but first off, there's an important delineation we need to talk about. It's called publishing portals versus collaboration sites. So how many of you know the difference between a publishing portal and a collaboration site? Okay, well let's talk about a couple of these first. Let's talk about these. First off, publishing portals are more like your standard intranet. You know, that's that left hand of the equation in the previous slide that we had a couple of slides ago. Collaboration is the right hand of that equation. That's where people are continuously updating information. It's more ad hoc and more collaborative in nature. If you think about those two dynamics, they have very different characteristics. So for instance, publishers, fewer contributors, lots of consumers. The audience that content goes to is typically broader. They don't grow as much because you're usually working on finished data like a user manual. You may update an employee user manual or a policy or procedure, but you're generally not just churning out net new content. And a lot of times it's restricted to web content or documents, and these are just general rules of thumb. On the collaboration side, that's where you have small groups. You know, everybody's contributing, providing feedback. The content is not necessarily for broad distribution, although some may benefit from using it, but it's usually focused on that group. There's a high growth pattern because you're constantly generating data. If you think about projects, You know, you collaborate on projects and you're constantly generating new documentation, and the content can be very wide and sweeping. Now, large companies will draw clear lines of separation with this. Larger companies may have separate web apps and possibly even separate farms for these two pieces. Smaller companies may merge the two. They may have clear lines just on navigation alone, and some tend to not do that. Some just tend to pepper publishing and collaboration. If you do have some usability issues, this might be just something to look at and see what you're doing. But here's an exercise I want you all to do as we continue talking about these two topics. And we're going to drill down into each of these, but think about your current portal or your current intranet and try to determine which one of these definitions yours most closely fits. Because depending on what your goals are, if your goal is publishing content or your goal is collaboration, you're going to want to focus on two different aspects of information architecture. And we're going to walk you through both of these. Let's start with publishing portals. So we've already talked about the definition of it. A study was done by the Nielsen-Norman Group to figure out what the biggest problems were for publishing portals. What they found out was pretty interesting. The most common problems were confusion between categories, unclear terminology, and inconsistent design, content, and navigation. You know, think about those three problems. They all have to do with categorization, labeling, and design, which really speaks to look and feel and navigation. You know, so drilling down into that, you know, the Nielsen-Norman Group did a study where they looked at some of the highest performing intranets out there, and they found some really interesting data. One of the biggest pieces was, if you look at the chart on the right-hand side here, it didn't matter if you were supporting 10 people or 100,000 people. Your top left, the highest performing intranets typically had less than 7 or 8 top-level navigation items. So think about your intranet. You know, we find in our business it's very common for people to have sometimes 30, you know, 20. It's there's a lot of issues that can arise from that, and so this is a common trend that, you know, definitely is worth a discussion. Now, the reason why companies sometimes end up with lots of top-level navigation is because they choose a scheme that is not quite right or not quite fitting to their business. You know, so a scheme is the definition in which you decide to categorize your content or your navigation. Now, a lot of companies tend to choose very concrete items like departments or geography, and others tend to take a more user-centric like topic and task. So let's talk about these. Really quickly, you know, department, again, it's tangible. Your company has orged themselves by department. Makes sense. I think people will get it, but there's some issues with this. It really centers and buckets content based off of who wrote the content. That's not necessarily the best way, because you have users that have a need and they're trying to get to content. They don't really know who exactly authored it, and that shouldn't be the way we're forced them to think. You know, topic and task are typically very effective ways of doing this because it does put the user first, and people think this way, and it is easy to organize, and you can typically drill down. It's much more dynamic and fluid, so you're able to get to fewer categories if you need to. A lot of companies use audience, but that can alienate users if you don't cover them all, and can result in a lot of duplicate content, right? Because something that's relevant to one audience is relevant to the other, so then where do you put that content? And then geography, a lot of large organizations tend to have separate intranets for geography. That's a good way when you're very large or widely distributed, but usually within a geography, the navigation for specific geography will be, you know, broken out by topic or task. Again, topic or task are probably the best ways and most effective way to structure from a usability, findability, and maintenance standpoint. So the other problem was labeling. Labeling is very important. We won't go through all of these, but it is important to have labels that cover these 7 attributes if you can, and meet these 7 criteria: specific, comprehensive, uniform, concise, transparent, familiar, and front-loaded. One of the things we recommend people doing, and this is something you can do today, is take all of your labels in your navigation within your intranet, create a spreadsheet, and then create a column for each of these 7 attributes, and check the ones that meet and the ones that don't. If you're not meeting most of these, you may want to think of changing your name for your label. And a good intranet will typically meet most of these. Sometimes it's hard to meet every single one, but if you can get most of them, you'll go a long way. The other item was around consistent design. So one huge thing that people typically don't realize, and this is something validated also by the Nielsen Norman Group, was that the biggest impact for users on their expectations of how a system works from a usability standpoint are major public-facing websites. So they're kind of setting the trends, and we know that they set the trends out there in the social world, but that does translate into business applications and your intranet. So it's important to keep these in mind. We'll drill down each of these, but at a high level, the three most common ones that are trending these days and something you want to keep in mind of, and the reason these work well is because they deal with information overload and some of the other issues that companies have to work with, are mega menus, breadcrumbs, and aggregates. So mega menus. Mega menus are a great way to help you reduce the number of clicks and still have fewer top-level navigation items. A lot of times people have so many top-level navigation items because they're worried about people having to click and having too deep of a hierarchy. Mega menus are a great feature-rich way to surface important content to users. This is a great one. You know, they can be very rich in content. This one has a search bar. It takes you to the landing page. It has the sub-items on it, and also has some dynamic content, most popular and recently added also as aggregates, which we'll talk about pretty soon. One caveat, try not to make your menus, mega menus, too wide. You know, a lot of times people get a little crazy with them and make them the width of the entire page. That can cause problems for you because people might think you're going to a new page when you're not, really not. So something to just be aware of. Breadcrumbs. People tend to access intranets. They don't just go to the home page and drill down from there. You know, they're getting sent links through a social media tool, through email, and they're jumping right in the middle of an intranet. It's important to give them a wayfinding or a compass or a way to know where they're at. That's why breadcrumbs are especially important these days. You know, breadcrumbs are becoming more popular and more critical. One important takeaway and caveat from SharePoint 2013 is that it's not enabled by default. You have to do a little bit of work to it. You know, I'm sure there's a good reason for it, but it's something that we need to keep in mind. And there's a lot of people that ask for it once they realized it wasn't there, and some good solutions out there. So feel free to reach out to us if you want access to some of those articles that will walk you through how to do this and how to add breadcrumbs back into your 2013 implementation. And last critical design element was aggregates. So aggregates are these dynamic collections of content that follow a common theme. It's one great way to add some personalization and keep things really dynamic and user-centric, again, focusing on the intent and the context of a user, are social filters. You know, most viewed, most commented, most liked, linked to, etc. In SharePoint 2013, there's a great feature called the content search web part, which allows you to take any type of search that you would use, and in SharePoint 2013, you are able to search on social filters, such as most viewed, most commented. Really powerful. So you're able to actually do this in search, take those results, and then style them however you want. You know, filters can be as simple as the top FAQs and commonly used forms up there, or as robust as an e-commerce site, as you see here on the bottom right. You know, it's I like the headline here. You know, what if your most commonly used forms always really were your most commonly used forms? Another consideration on publishing portal, and this has to do with design and some of those pressures, you know, the millennials, is dealing with mobile users. A lot of companies feel like the answer is responsive design. That's very expensive depending on your tool that you have, and it takes a lot of time and energy. And so people are being forced to come up with economical ways to address mobile support. The responsibility here is falling on your landing pages. So you have your 7 or 8 top-level navigation items. You have a mega menu, but your tablet or mobile device can't surface a mega menu or doesn't do it very well. So as a user, they're going to click on your top-level navigation. Well, that's a landing page, right? It's a summary. It's the front page of the newspaper for that specific section. Or a better way to say it, it's the front page of that section of the newspaper. A lot of companies that are trying to come up with economical ways to deal with mobile support are putting larger push buttons on those landing pages. You know, it makes for an easy user experience. You can use content search web parts actually on this page to make this content dynamic and focus on what's most popular or what's most relevant to users, or you could design it yourself using your own analytics and governance to determine what's on here. The key is large push buttons that act as alternate navigation for mobile users. And this is a great way to get a lot of mobile lift without a lot of cost to you. And then last consideration, personalization, right? Focusing on intent and context. You know, I think everyone, for the most part, should know what personalization is. It's taking the user and then surfacing content that's relevant to them, maybe based off their job, based off their location, their role, department they work for. One thing we always recommend is to start small. A lot of times companies will start right out of the gate trying to weave personalization in every little section within their portal. That can get messy real fast. It creates headaches when you're trying to test or when you're trying to debug, can cause confusion to users. So we always like to think about it as very modular. You know, one great way is just have tabs, your top level navigation tab, and have that be what's personalized. So for a user, either they get a tab that's all personalized for them, or it doesn't show up, or they just have a much better way to access this type of content, personalized content. So those are the main considerations for publishing portals. Let's talk about collaboration sites. If you look at the most common challenges for collaboration sites, typically what we hear are search isn't useful, there's too many levels within sites or folders within libraries, there's too much irrelevant or outdated content. That third item, you know, it's usually that's not irrelevant or outdated, it's just that the users aren't being shown content that's applicable to them, and so it feels like that, especially if they're looking for something pretty specific. You know, these problems are different from publishing, as I'm sure you can gather just by thinking through them. And therefore, the publishing IA considerations don't scale or won't work effectively. You know, site navigation is not scalable. You know, if you think about collaboration, that's more like trying to organize a pile of sand versus a stack of bricks, which is, you know, analogous to the publishing side. You know, in fact, it's pretty common for collaboration sites to be presented in a flat structure. So companies that may have hundreds or thousands of collaboration sites for planning the company picnic or specific projects, I'd say they are relatively flat and they don't have a huge hierarchy. It's just impossible to manage that many sites. And no matter how good you do that, it's just not going to scale. And especially if you're busting at the seams now, it's only going to continue to get worse. So what we need to do is think of content, and not just the sites, but also the content within the sites, as correlated and connected through common terms so that they can be surfaced via a network of related content. So to put it simply, instead of this here on the left-hand side, hierarchies of parent, sibling, and child relationships, think more like this. Now, I know some of you might think this on the right-hand side looks way worse than the one on the left, but the difference is you're not seeing all of that stuff all at once. You know, you're pivoting on this content, and so wherever you pivot to, you're only being surfaced the most common things. So it really allows you for an experience more like this, where the user's at the center and everything that's relevant to them is being surfaced to them within arm's reach. One of the keys to doing this is metadata, tagging, and user profile attributes. And the trick is, you need to get all of those things, metadata, tagging, and user profile attributes, speaking the same language. And that's what allows all these connections to be made. You know, and once you do this, what you'll find is SharePoint is really good at handling this and knowing what to do with this once you create these connections and these common terms. So how do we get there? Well, for starters, for collaboration sites, your focus and number one priority should be metadata, tagging, and search. These are the cornerstone for being able to present all this information based on the context and intent of a user. As we also said, SharePoint 2013 does a great job of knowing what to do with this. And so for the rest of the presentation, at least the presentation part, not the demo, we're going to talk about how you get there. These are 4 easy steps that will allow you to approach this in a practical way. Now, this is something we don't necessarily recommend jumping in and trying to clobber all at once. The steps are: find the key use case, design your metadata and taxonomy, build your information architecture assets, and then build your UI assets. So let's drill down into each of these quickly. For your use cases, we always recommend you start with a collaboration activity that's already occurring within your organization, and ideally one that's already being used in SharePoint. It's hard enough to get this stuff right and start with something that's valuable for your organization. It's hard if in addition to this, you have to worry about training users, educating them, getting them used to even using SharePoint, and then also trying to get them to understand the importance of metadata tagging, and so on and so forth. So we always recommend start with some place you can today. Common places are project management, or maybe your report or deliverable preparation. This step's pretty easy. Find a process that's very, very valuable to your business, something that you have the right stakeholders and key people in mind. Define that process. Think about how you can support it through SharePoint collaboration at a high level. Think about who those users are and what their roles are, and try to put a little box around that so you can get an idea of your user. This can also be referred to as a persona. And then you have the people, the process. Next thing is to look at what information you need to support that process. That's all you have to do for this case, is make sure you get the right use case. Next, we're going to take that information needed from our use case and do a little bit of design. We need to determine what type of content types, metadata, tags, all those things that we need to worry about in SharePoint, and figure out how we want to build them. One point of caution: don't try and boil the ocean. It doesn't have to be a full comprehensive where every single piece of content within this use case is tagged and super structured. Even one well-defined piece with 2 or 3 metadata elements can drive a lot of value here and is a great place to start. You can always go back and add more later on. Obviously, make sure you reuse as many existing elements in your term store or your overall taxonomy if you can. And then here's a great exercise. We're still not doing anything concrete just yet. Look at your user profiles, and particularly for the users that are part of this process, and determine if any of the content types and metadata fields that you've defined could plug into any of the user profile fields, such as past projects, interests, responsibilities, and skills. The field asked me about is a good catch-all for profiles. And so just think about, are some of these, maybe one of my tags is a department, or maybe it's an area. If I'm oil and gas, you'll see in our demo, if you're oil and gas company and your project is specific to a region that you're looking at drilling at, would it make sense to add that specific region as a skill set or an experience or an interest for a user profile? Just think about that and try and figure out what makes sense for your users to bridge user to the data. Very important there. Next, build all it out in SharePoint. There's lots of documentation on best practices out there. You can follow that, get some consulting help if you need help with a specific piece. It's hard to architect this well, and this is a whole other topic itself. We may cover that down the road in a subsequent presentation, but for now, build it out. Managed terms are great for standardization because you can make sure that people can't enter in their own custom information there. Enterprise keywords are good for catch-all, but users can introduce bad values. And then key, as you design these, and you've already defined a use case, hopefully you have some workflow or some event handlers or something that you're using to help automate this user process or this use case you have. Take that and try and figure out where you can drive consistency in your metadata by automatically tagging content for users. So for instance, maybe when a person creates a site, you can tag that site, and then when they add documents within it, you can automatically, if there's common tags, you can tag their content so they don't have to do that every time. Again, drives consistency, reduces one-off errors, and helps with user adoption. And then the next thing is, if you want this all to work in search, your key metadata fields, add them as managed properties so that they can be leveraged in search. So I've done all this. I feel good about it. I feel like I'm auto-tagging data to my user profiles. I'm populating my user profiles with tags when it's relevant to. Now I need to go to SharePoint and see what it looks like. You know, SharePoint will give you a lot out of the box, as we talked about. But you know, you're going to want to go to search, see how it's responding. You know, are you getting relevant content? You'll want to likely improve your search results. This is a whole other topic as well. There's lots of tools and ways to do that, and the whole governance model that should be applied to make sure you're getting the most out of search. But you know, it's good to look at it and see what it's doing. Next, go to your My Sites. You know, look at the content, make sure it's all surfacing appropriately, and then look at any gaps. You know, are there places or things we can do from the UI that we can use to improve what users are seeing? You know, those content search web parts are a great way to do this, you know, to add further personalization to your user's experience. And then, you know, at this point, it's all about determining the value of the time and energy and money it'll take to make a UI change versus the value and the lift you think you'll get from a user experience standpoint. If you're using 2010, this whole process still applies. You may have to do a few more UI tweaks to get to a good solid user experience versus 2013. So that's something you'll have to evaluate real time. So with that, let's talk about the sprawling collaboration sites issue. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Mike Moore, who's going to take over and show you how this works in the real world in a real world example.
Thank you, Jesus. So there's some key things to think about as you're thinking about your sprawling site collaborations and your areas. You want to organize your sites so that they're extensible. And these are some key things to think about as you go through and try to make your project collaboration area or your team site collaboration area extensible. Create sites using common content type baselines that imply a purpose, right? So you want to make sure that your collaboration area has a specific use case that you're centering this around. So again, think of that business use case as you're developing not only your metadata tagging, but also your logical architecture structure. Also provide multiple ways for people to use this site. So there may be multiple templates that you want to use in order to surface the sites that are going to be provisioned within your collaboration area. And then also create a system that is a baseline for extending those provisioning capabilities, right? So maybe you want to add approvals to your sites as they're created so that you have some level of governance around having these sites created and people participating within them. And maybe you would like some additional data to be gathered during that provisioning process. And that really leads into another key point, whereas you do not want to waste the information that you're gathering during that provisioning process. Organizing your sites using metadata is the first step, but make sure that that's applicable to what the users want to do, and also provide the ability to auto-tag certain things within your site so that it is extensible for search and it's automatically discoverable, as opposed to requiring the users to decide, how do I want to tag this, and then how does that apply to our enterprise search capabilities. The other thing you want to do is give users capability within these collaboration sites. The best way to extend them is give users capability to go ahead and add functionality to their site without having to engage IT to do that. Workflow is a really great way to do that. We have done that during this demo, but that's something that we can cover in another session. Enable continued information sharing by incorporating those capabilities offered within your profiles and search as well, right? So don't just use your collaboration sites, really tie in those different pieces of SharePoint, such as your profile and My Site, so that you can have that information surface to you as opposed to having to go find the information. So speaking to the demo specifically, what we'll be covering, as Jesus implied earlier, is an oil and gas use case. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to determine whether they want to ramp up production within the Permian Basin area based on some geological research and some estimates. So there's some key actors associated with this demo. We'll be focusing particularly on doing a lot of this as the SharePoint administrator to avoid going back and forth between users. And then we will log in as one of these actors later on to look at their profile and see some of the results of what we've done. So key person here is Joe Gilbert. He's asking this question around, do I want to ramp up production? And he's instructed his executive assistant, Beth, to go ahead and create a collaboration site to facilitate the collaboration of making that decision, right? And as part of that, he's defined a project team that he wants to be put together in order to make that decision. So Jane Garcia is going to be that project owner. We're going to have an operations manager, an exploration team manager, as well as a geologist and operational specialist. Those folks will go and they will produce things like estimates around geologic formations and reserves, as well as what currently exists within the region. And then what we're going to do from an action standpoint in this demo is we're going to go ahead and provision a site for them. We're going to leverage the metadata that we gathered during that site provisioning process, and then we're going to enable them to upload documents and have auto tagging in place, as well as at the same time building out their profiles so that they can start to see this information surface without having to go look for it. So that being said, we're going to jump into the demo. And what I'd like to do now is show you the home page of our demo. And again, this is focused on a collaboration area. And this collaboration area is also focused on a specific area of the business. So service operations team collaboration area. So this is important, and again, this ties back to some of your logical architecture within SharePoint. Making decisions around collaboration to make your environment extensible is very important. What this allows you to do is center on a specific business area, which is very clear to the users when they come in here that I'm in a service operations collaboration area. And it also gives you a way to bucket things from a content management standpoint and managing your total SharePoint farm. So as you see on here, some of the key things that Jesus talked about: find key use cases and design the metadata and taxonomy, right? So we've defined a use case. It's oil and gas. We want to find out if we want to increase our production in a particular area. It's a good business use case, could be very beneficial to this oil and gas company. Then we've built out some IA assets to support that, right? So what we have is a collaboration area where I can add a new site. And I already have some existing sites in here that are organized by region, because it makes sense from a service operations standpoint for this particular company to organize this by region. The other thing we've done is we've enabled site directory by the way that we're provisioning this. And again, you can provision these in multiple different ways. What we've decided to use is some out-of-the-box capability around a list. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and provision one of these sites for the specific use case that we want to take care of. And by doing that, we're going to gather that valuable information we talked about, and then we're going to provision that site appropriately such that we can leverage that valuable information as we go forward. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in Permian Basin Research, and I'm going to name this the Permian Production Assessment Project. Okay? And what we're going to do here is we're going to say, okay, this is part of geoscience. Again, we've got some type-ahead features. We're using the term store here to surface this information. We want to be in the Permian Basin, and then we want our owner to be Jane Garcia, as we mentioned before. We're going to go ahead and take a guess on the estimated budget that's associated to this project, and we're going to make sure that given this is a project, it's going to have a start and end date. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that we can tie some retention policies to this later on if we choose to. Site URL I've left blank for you to see that this is going to be populated automatically. We'll go ahead and call this an other site. And then the other key thing here is we're going to choose what type of site we want to leverage. So given that this is going to be a capital project associated to the business, we're going to choose the capital project site. And to that is going to be tied some specific tools that we want to leverage. So what's going to happen now as we click our Save button and things are happening behind the scenes is we're taking all of that metadata we just filled out to provision this site, and we're automatically provisioning that site we want to collaborate in. And then in addition, we're going to provide ourselves a really nice way to use that site tagging in a way to auto-tag your documents that get uploaded, as well as to enable search to find my site, surface it within the site directory, as well as be able to leverage some of the workflow capabilities within the site. Okay, so we're going to go back to our home page here. And what we've just provisioned is the Permian Basin Research site. And so let's go ahead and click down in there, and we'll see what got provisioned for us. And okay, great. Looks like we've got some information here for us. We've got a way to create some project documents. We've got a task already assigned to us. And then in addition, you'll see workflow members, workflow steps, which is some of our workflow automation we've provided. Again, we'll cover that in a separate demo, but this one will focus on the metadata. We've also got some workflow tasks here that are also ways to control what's being assigned to us. So one of the first things in here is to configure the workflow. We're going to do that to some extent, but the thing I want to show you first, if we go to the site settings around this site, is how did that information that we filled out flow down to this site. So as the site settings come up, what we're going to find is if we go to the property bag settings, you'll see that this site provisioned by us using this list was tagged with the key metadata that we entered upon creating the site. And the reason that's important is multifaceted. One of the reasons this is important, and again, you can see project name, project owner, project type, the region, as well as the other information that we filled out associated with this project. So the reason that's important is again, multifaceted. So one of the reasons is you want to be able to reorganize your sites if you have specific reorganization in your company. So this one has regions. You may not decide to continue working in the Permian Basin region, and in that case, maybe you'd want to get rid of that tag or reorganize those sites that have a Permian Basin tag. What this enables you to do is, although your site structure is very flat within this collaboration area, as Jesus mentioned, it's very hard to manage a hierarchical structure, but it's very easy to manage metadata in a hierarchy. So I can have multiple levels of grouping, creating a hierarchy with metadata, but my site structure in and of itself can be completely flat. So that also allows me to go back and say I want to reorg, and I can create a simple script to go ahead and reorg all of my sites without having to do any physical moving of those sites around within the SharePoint environment. So one of the other things we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and create a project document set. And what I want to show you here is the ability to auto tag things. So in this case, specific use case, we used a document set. The reason we're using a document set here is it's a good way to group a bunch of documents that you're going to produce, in this case an estimate associated with some recommendations and maybe some other information associated to this particular project, and then go ahead and route that around in workflow. It also gives you the ability to go ahead and tag that document set as a whole, so you can go ahead and find it again. So we'll name this again the Permian Basin Production Assessment, and we can give it a generic description. What I want to point out here is all of these things that are being tagged associated with this document set are auto tagged now because I filled that out during the site provisioning. So the key here is, why would I want to refill these things out if I've already given you that information? I have the ability to change those. Maybe my budget changed, and that's fine. I changed it to a nice round number, and maybe my end date changed as a result of that because I added some additional scope to this project. I have the ability to do that. There's some additional information here that are specific to the project team site template itself. So these are things that you can also configure associated to this particular project and or projects. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. What that's going to do is going to create me a project document set, and then I can upload my documents into that document set. The other benefit of creating a document set to group your documents is that it is discoverable by search, and every document I can upload here is going to inherit the tagging that I've provided on my document set. Okay? So at this point, what I'd like to do is transition to another site in the interest of time, just to show you what you can do associated to also, while you're collaborating in these sites, start to fill out some of the information around user profiles. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back up to the home page, and I'm going to go down into another site we've pre-configured for this demo, Permian Basin onboarding, to stay within the same vein. And we're going to go ahead and start to drill into one of the things around this. We've got workflow members, this list, and we mentioned this, and we've also mentioned that we're not going to specifically go through the workflow. Again, that's another demo, but some of this may be tied to how you organize your site, and in this case it is. So as you can see here, we've got 3 members of the group that we defined associated to this project. There's a member that's missing here, that's Bill Bryce, and we're going to go ahead and add him to this project. So by adding him to this project, there's a number of things that are going to occur. He is going to get some permissions to this project. He's going to be able to access the content within this project and be treated as a team member. Okay, so we're going to pull him up, and the missing person here is going to be Bill Bryce. He's a team lead exploration manager in the Permian Basin. So we're going to give him a title of team lead. We're going to call him Bill Bryce, and then we're going to say he's a primary responsibility on this particular project around team leadership. He's in the Permian Basin. His role specifically that he's going to perform is the survey, so we want to tell him to perform the survey. So let's go this back one more time. He's going to be the exploration manager. Sorry, I got my two things mixed up. And then the action is going to be to perform survey. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and save Bill into this list. And so again, behind the scenes, what's built into this framework and providing tool sets for your users is I don't have to go add this person to this site to give them permission to this site. He now has permissions. He has a notification in his inbox that he's part of this team and that he also has access to this site. In addition, there's some things that may have happened in the background that have tied these folks into this particular site. So what we can do is we can go ahead and look at that. So I'm signed in as the administrator right now, and what I want to do real quick is just go look at Bill Bryce from the administrator perspective, and then we'll go ahead and look at Bill Bryce from Bill Bryce's perspective to see what happened to draw him into this site outside of just sending him an email notification that he's part of this site, right? So what we're going to do is go ahead and go to Bill Bryce's profile from my administrator site. And as Bill Bryce's profile is coming up here, I want to point out that there are some activities that have been happening as we, the administrators, have been interacting with these particular projects. You'll see Permian Basin Research is part of my activity feed. You'll see that Regional Route Optimization, which is an older project, is part of my activity feed. You can mention me or ask about SharePoint, right? So these are key things to start to fill out that I maybe not want to fill out myself, that I want to be just filled out for me. So if we look at Bill's page, we can start to see something that happened just recently, right? A minute ago, you can ask Bill Bryce about the Permian Basin. So now I've surfaced Bill Bryce as somebody that's worked in the Permian Basin, and if you look at his mention about or ask me about, you also know that he works in geoscience. So these are the two key pieces of information that you can now search on using SharePoint to find somebody that has an expert in geoscience that has experience in the Permian Basin. Okay? So now if we transition and we look at Bill Bryce's profile from Bill's perspective, and again, let me bring this up, and I'm going to refresh Bill's profile. And again, you can see before he was not asking about Permian Basin, and you see the project was not part of Bill's profile. And what you can see as you bring this up is, again, you'll see the Ask Me About change, and you'll see Permian Basin be tagged here. You'll see Permian Basin be tagged about Bill's activities, which we saw from the administrator's perspective. And the other key thing here is if we open up the sites area about Bill Bryce, you'll see that the site we were working on also got added to Bill's sites that he specifically follows. So why is that important? So one of the key things that we have to deal with within the specific SharePoint world is how do I get people to follow things so they don't bookmark them? This is a really good way to go ahead and extend that so that we can now have folks within the profiles following these sites in an automated fashion. If I want to find those, I know exactly where to go. I go to my profile, and I can go ahead and have all my bookmarks to all the sites I'm following. I can simply not follow those sites if it becomes too cumbersome for me to do that. And now information is being surfaced to me. I'm not going out to the information to find it. So at this point, I want to transition back to Jesus to close up, and we appreciate for your time.
Great, thanks, Mike. So in conclusion, there's a few things we want you to take away as takeaways here. First off, SharePoint 2013 has all the tools to effectively meet the needs of the future, but you must invest in information architecture to do this. Also keep in mind, publishing portals and collaboration sites are very different and should be separated in some form or another, even if it's logically, or it should just shift your mind of thinking. For publishing portals, you should focus on navigation, proper labeling, and design training patterns. For collaboration, metadata, tagging, and search should probably be your focus. And as you get ready for Enterprise 3.0, start small, focus on good content you already have. So with that, I'd like to give you just a quick obligatory commercial. We work for Credera, a management and IT consulting firm. We're a Microsoft Gold certified partner. We've been working with SharePoint for quite a while. We sat on the Microsoft Office 14 Developer Advisory Council several certifications and competencies. As you can see, we've worked for several clients in this space related to SharePoint. Thank you for attending. Please be sure to complete our evaluations. If you have any questions, feel free to contact either Mike or myself. Also, please check out our blogs. We're constantly putting lots of great content out there. And then also, if you're interested, please look on careerscareer.com. Thank you.